Near Field Communication, or NFC, is a technology that allows for proximity wireless communication between either two active devices, so this could be two smartphones, or an active and a passive device. So this is when you're using your phone to read one of these NFC tags, or for example when you're using wireless payment with a wireless payment enabled bank card. And in this video we're going to take a look at how all that stuff works. So most of the time, NFC is classified as a form of RFID, or radio frequency identification. A very simple form of RFID are these tags that you see on clothes in a clothes shop, so that when you leave the store without paying, the alarm will detect that you've stolen something, right? That's a very simple form of RFID. But NFC isn't actually a form of RFID, and that's because it doesn't use radio waves. It doesn't use radio waves at all. NFC uses magnetic fields instead. And this also explains why it only works at such a short range, right? The phones have to be very close, or the phone and the tag have to be very close to each other. So it only works at very, very close distances, which is sometimes an advantage, right? For security, it's definitely an advantage, because if I would want to copy data from some device that someone has, I would have to get very close to that person to obtain the information, because NFC doesn't have a very long range. So we now know that it uses magnetic fields, but how exactly does it use those? Well, it works in a very similar way to a transformer. Okay, so in a transformer, what you've got is two coils that are very close to each other, a primary coil and a secondary coil. The primary coil is connected to some sort of AC power supply, such as a power outlet, and the secondary coil gets connected to a device that uses power, such as a light bulb, for example. What happens when you turn on the power is an alternating current goes through the primary coil, which creates an alternating magnetic field around this coil, right? Because coils are electromagnets. They create magnetic fields when electricity goes through them. This moving magnetic field induces an electric current in the other coil, right? So you know that when you have a magnet and you move it near a coil, in the right way of course, then that induces electricity in the coil. That's how you generate power. So the moving magnetic field of the first coil will generate electricity in the second coil, and that will then power the light bulb. And so we've just transferred power wirelessly. And in a transformer, the purpose of this is to change the voltage. So by having a different amount of turns in the second coil, we can have a different voltage being applied to the light bulb. In NFC, the goal is not to change the voltage, or maybe it is, but that's not the primary goal. The primary goal is to transfer the wireless power. So what you do is you put the first coil in the reader, or the phone, for example, and you put the secondary coil in the tag, or the passive chip that needs power. So that's how NFC devices, NFC tags, like little chips, get their power. So they don't need a power supply, they get power wirelessly from the device reading them or sending information to them. So that's how the power supply works. Now let's see how the data is actually transferred. As we discussed, to make wireless power transmission work, you need an alternating current. It doesn't work with DC electricity, you need AC. So this AC, this alternating current going through the primary coil, has a certain frequency, which is about 13 megahertz in an NFC system. That will also be the frequency of the electricity in the secondary coil. Now what we can do is we can somehow modulate this signal to get information in it. Modulation is essentially encoding data into a carrier signal. So examples of modulation are FM radio, where the modulation happens by modulating the frequency, so slightly changing the frequency to get information in there, or AM radio, where you modulate the amplitude to get the information in there. What NFC commonly uses PSK, or phase shift key, which means the phase of the signal is shifted rapidly to get the information in there. So it shifts the phase of the signal to get the information across. maybe one day we'll make a dedicated video about modulation because it is quite interesting. Now let's see how the device, so the NFC tag, would receive this data, and it probably has to send something back to the phone. So how would it do that, right? Well, it does that in an extremely clever way. We know that the current in the secondary coil is closely related to the current in the primary coil. In other words, in our transformer, if we short the wires on the secondary coil, we get a load of current in the secondary coil, so we also get more current in the primary coil, which means that when we are able to change the current inside the secondary coil, that also changes the current in the primary coil. So what the NFC tag can do is change the resistance of its coil, which changes its current. Therefore, the current in the primary coil inside your mobile phone also changes, and this change can be picked up by the mobile phone or the reader. And that's how information can be signaled to the phone, so by making changes in the current in the secondary coil, and therefore also in the primary coil. So it's extremely clever. So that's how the hardware of NFC works. And the nice thing is that an NFC chip, because it gets wireless power and is able to communicate, it's basically a microcomputer. It is able to store information, it can be used for processing information as well. It can even encrypt data and establish encrypted connections between it and the device reading it, which is of course a very nice feature when this is a wireless transaction system. Then that's a pretty nice feature to have, isn't it? Of course, active communication between two phones works in a very similar or even the same way. Only then you would probably be better off using Wi-Fi or Bluetooth, because then you can have a much longer range, which is more convenient, of course. So NFC is primarily very cool and very useful for these passive tags that you can put on things, and it's less useful for communication between two phones or two active devices of any kind. Well, anyway, there you go. Now you know a bit more about how NFC works. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and of course, thank you for watching.